Tell us about the one from Ubatuba.
Edison Boaventura. So the one from Ubatuba is a case that happened on September 7, 1957 at Praia das Toninhas in Ubatuba. And this object, it exploded. At one point, it exploded. The people who were on the beach, fishermen, tourists at that time, spending the September 7th holiday, ended up seeing the explosion. And then some fragments reached the beach, but they were hot. Then they waited for everything to cool down, picked up that material, and I found it here. These are some fragments of the material from the Ubatuba UFO that exploded. This is a small local newspaper that published an article. There was even one of the fishermen who saw the Brazilian Navy together with Americans collecting a larger piece of this object. This is the fisherman, Mr. Virgilio, who saw this whole operation carried out by the Brazilian Navy together with another foreign navy. I believe it was Americans who did that.
Wow, so this UFO that exploded, was it small? No?
It was big, it was big. The big piece was collected, put on a ship, and taken away. It was the fragments that washed up on the beach, you know? Here, I think I found it. Here is one of the analyses we did at USP as well of this material. So here it is, look. And it showed 99.3% pure magnesium, right? It's a material that's not found on Earth.
Not found on Earth? This would be an ultra material.
Yeah, you can make it in a lab today, okay? But here are articles from the old magazine O Cruzeiro that published stories about it. Here is an analysis that was done at the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture about this case. Now, here's the thing. NASA says there's nothing, that they don't know anything, that whatever. We got a report from NASA from 1981 about this case from Ubatuba. Wow, so what now? We got this from a professor at FGV in São Paulo who guided us. A researcher from Stanford University who came to Ubatuba to investigate this case. That was in 1985. And then he guided us and had already done several analyses. Analyses at Caltech, at other French universities, at Stanford. An isotopic analysis was also done in 1976. And there's this NASA document where Professor Peter A. Sturrock from the Plasma Research Institute at Stanford University requests this analysis and puts it here. Look, Brazil magnesium sample, right? Which is a Brazilian magnesium sample. It's here. And then they made this document about the sample from the Ubatuba case, right? That's amazing. And in the Ubatuba case, these fragments were also collected by the Navy and the Army. And a few years ago, I received some fragments, 4 fragments from the son of an Army serviceman who kept them. He helped collect them and kept some in his pocket. And the son grew up his whole life hearing his father talk about it. This is from the flying saucer from Ubatuba, from the Ubatuba flying saucer, right? And then when his father died, the son found a petition of mine that I had made to the Army under the Freedom of Information Act. So he found it there, I don't know, digging around, boom, he found it. He found then my name came up. He found my name and everything. Contact info, got in touch and said, man, I have some stuff here, and for me it has no value. But for you, maybe it does. So I said, well, send it to me, right? He said, I'll just ask one thing. I don't want my father's name to be revealed because he was an important person in the Army, so it could tarnish his name. I said, no, that's fine, no problem with that. So what did I do? When I received the pieces, I decided to go to the University of São Paulo to analyze them. First, I did an analysis. It was qualitative. And the qualitative one showed me that it had a lot of magnesium. So I was already excited. I said, hey, if there's a high percentage of magnesium, it matches what I knew about the case from the past, those reports from the Ministry of Agriculture, which are old. Then I said, no, but now I'm going to do a quantitative analysis to find out the correct percentage. Then, in the quantitative test, I found 99.3 with 0.07 being magnesium oxide. That is corroded magnesium, probably because of the salinity of the...
But since 99.3 is not found in nature, but it is possible to make it synthetically, does that prove anything? When you got to this number, why?
In 1957, there were no metallurgical plants in that region. At Praia das Toninhas, there were 6 fishermen's houses. And from time to time, it was rented by tourists from Sao Paulo, from the countryside of Sao Paulo, who would go there for the weekend to drink and fish, and who were there spending the weekend. And another thing, since there was no metalworking company in Brazil that made that kind of thing at the time, in 1957, another suspicion we might have is, oh, but couldn't it be a meteorite? So I asked some specialists, 2 experts in meteoritics, to analyze the reports and the material. And Paolo Anselmattioli, for example, gave me a report and said, man, this is not a meteorite. I don't know what it is, but it's not a meteorite, because a meteorite that has magnesium has at most 26%. Combined with nickel, with iron, stanoidite, farringtonite, and other metals, it's usually a mixture.
And so there is no meteorite that has fallen to Earth that has magnesium at 99.9, 99.3. In other words, it's strong evidence of a UFO.
A piece of something from outside this Earth, exactly. And so the piece is here. I'll put it in your hand. Man. Which are pieces of these? Here is the little bag. You can see that, in fact, the handwriting is in that 1957 handwriting style.
Can you show it to everyone? Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
I'll show it here.
Can you show it? Can you touch it? Yes, you can take it. Here, look. If someone had to die, I'd already be dead.
The camera catches it here. Look. Look how it shines. Wow, a lot.
And sometimes there are people who pick this thing up and it's happened before. Then they start to sweat. There are others who start to feel hot or cold, you know? Yeah, each person has a strange reaction. Some people, for example, take this little one and say, no, I don't know. It feels like I have nothing in my hand. Right? That's what they say. Put it in the middle of your hand. Then you say, it feels like I have nothing in my hand.
You feel some kind of energy.
Turn your face like this and do this. No, but there's nothing here.
Yeah, there's really nothing. Wow, incredible, huh? Look how impressive that is.
So that's how it goes. And people have the wildest reactions. I don't know. Me, for example, I don't feel anything.
I feel more energy.
I've seen people start sweating here and say, it's hot, take it out of my hand. You know, it's burning hot. I said, it's not burning at all. Then someone else grabs it. No, it's cold. No, take it, hold it. No, it's hot. That's crazy, huh? Negócio estranho.
Edson, I am here.
But man, what an amazing thing.
I have a question for you about, man, everything you're saying is so wonderful and it's Brazilian, right? A Brazilian product. Why? What interest does Brazil have in not beating its chest and saying, yes, we found it, the army, the government, and so on? Why do we have to keep hiding behind the Americans?
Excellent question. Why? Because there has been an agreement since 1941 between the American and Brazilian governments on this UFO issue. So everything we get here in terms of artifacts, technology related to these non-human UFOs, and also non-human biology, in other words, non-human beings, we're supposed to hand it over to the Americans on a silver platter. Because back then, actually, the masterminds of the 1940s understood that the Americans would have more expertise to deal with reverse engineering. Since the Roswell incident, right, happened there in 47, so they would have more experience with this kind of thing. It's their version of the Virginia case. And in exchange, yes. For those who don't know, yes, it's their version of the Virginia case. So what happened? During all these years, during all these decades, we give everything to the Americans. Man, that's embarrassing. It's embarrassing because we have qualified scientists here who could somehow be working on these issues and so on, of reverse engineering, even putting Brazil at the technological forefront as well. But unfortunately, we have to bow to the Americans on this issue. Yeah.
But what I still think is that it's not just a matter between Brazil and the Americans, it's a matter of the system, right? The system has the rulers as its pillars, so it makes sense for the system not to disclose it. Brazil and the United States are considered equal from the system's perspective. Do you see what I mean?
And it's not just, for example, fragments coming from UFO crashes or shoot downs. They're also interested in what? The implants, right? So what happens? The person is taken inside the craft, usually gets implanted, something is put inside people, right? So these beings are using this kind of implant. And some time ago, we had Dr. Roger Carlier and Daryl Sims, two Americans who performed surgeries to remove these implants from people's bodies. So what did you have? Sometimes you had a metallic implant, sometimes you had a biological implant. But did they actually discover the technology behind this thing? No. The most they managed to discover is the chemical composition of implants, for example, metallic ones. So what did they find out? That it was usually an alloy, right, of aluminum and magnesium, also super pure. That it was a strange thing, right? And why did they put that in people's bodies, right? Sometimes in the arm, at the base of the brain here, sometimes in the leg, sometimes in the back. And here are some that were extracted in these surgeries, right? So there are some artifacts that were removed, right? Look at this. Here's an x-ray, right? That was taken of the hand of one of the people with these implants. So it shows the implant here. Perfect. Okay. So this here, along with metamaterials and ultramaterials, is what's most coveted nowadays by military scientists because they want to know how this works. We, ufologists, what do we say? Why did they put the implant in? We only have conjecture and hypotheses because we don't know why they were doing this to some people. And they're still doing it, okay? Are they still doing it? They're still doing it. But it changed a little. Now it went from something metallic to a living biological thing. Like a parasite, like a larva, you know, like a little creature that's connected to some parts and then it starts to undergo some kinds of mutations too. Now, what do we think this is? It's like a device where maybe these beings use these people's vision, their hearing, to capture images and sound. As if the person were a camera, a walking camcorder, alive. Wow. Or to implant some kind of order in the person's mind. Go to a certain place, meet a certain person, do this, do that. Okay, these are speculations, right? Speculations. Why? And also for tracking, maybe a tracking system. So he would know where the person is, like the GPS we put on dolphins or on whales. So you can know exactly that whale that was here in the Pacific Ocean, now it's over there in the Atlantic. Yes, it's monitoring these people as well. So we believe that these artifacts are also connected to this kind of thing when placed inside a human being. Today, for example, we already have some people talking about these metamaterials, about reverse engineering. Let me see if I can find something here. Here, look. Recently, we had a former presidential advisor, Harold Malmy Green, who was on the podcast American Alchemy, right? And he said that, who was this guy anyway? Just so you have an idea. He was an advisor to 5 American presidents. So the guy, right, exactly. It's Harold Malmy Green. And he said now in April 2025 that he handled UFO metamaterials. This other guy here, who is he? He is Air Force Colonel Ajax Augusto Mendez Correa, right? Move it a bit closer here. Here, look, Colonel Ajax is right here. He recently appeared also in April on a podcast by a friend of mine, Ricardo Beccari from Porta de Hangar. And he gave a statement there saying that when he was in the Air Force, an Air Force pilot, ex-pilot, right? He met a major who was Major Gilberto Zandimelo. And this major, at the time, he was in charge of a department that researched UFOs for the Air Force. And his headquarters was at the Cuarto Comar here in Cambuchi. So what did he say, right? What did this Major Zandimelo tell Colonel Ajax? He said, look, we got some fragments of a UFO in Rio de Janeiro, and we're taking them to San Jose dos Campos, which is our technological area 51. So he gave this statement. Now, recently, talking about metamaterials, he's the first Brazilian Air Force officer to mention metamaterials. Got it? I already knew that, right? As a ufologist, we know what goes on here and there, and that these recoveries usually do happen. It goes to San Jose dos Campos, whether it's metal or biological. Previously, it went to Unicamp, as in the Varginha case. But now it's not going there anymore. It's going to a maximum security base of the Brazilian army in San Jose dos Campos and in Rio de Janeiro. There were people who died for snooping where they shouldn't have in these things. And others died, probably contaminated because they had to deal with reverse engineering. Messing with those elements, right? Those metamaterials, ultramaterials. But the worst are those who were silenced by their own governments or by those military personnel who wanted to hide this from the public.